welcome to Doctorpiece Theatre. My name is Dr. Dennis Business, and tonight we will continue our dive into the last of the Unholy Trinity, Reaper's Creek. When we last left our hero, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Here's hoping. Chapter 2. The Cold Glass Smack. My mom was a little late getting home. Traffic. She threw her keys on the table and hugged her husband, my stepdad, Donnie. "How are my kids?" my mom asked. Papa replied, "Those little rascals, they're alive." My mom glared at Papa, clearly not satisfied with the bare minimum requirement that we did not die on his watch. My mom told us to fend for ourselves for dinner. With her matted down, dyed red hair and basic makeup smeared after a long day's work, she was off to take a shower and spend the rest of her day watching VHS movies on her 13-inch TV in her bedroom, laying on the custom log bed Papa had made her. Joanna walked into the front room and yelled through the door to my mom, asking, "Hey, Mom, can I go to Uncle Matt's house for the bonfire?" My mom screamed back, "I don't care!" So Joanna immediately smiled and ran off to get her jacket. "I want to go too," I screamed after Joanna. Joanna replied, "I don't care. Just stay away from me." I smiled and ran to get my own coat as well. Our neighborhood was a quiet place. We lived in the middle of nowhere. Our neighbors' houses were a good 1,000 feet from one another, at the very least leaving us to easily mind our own business. A creek ran through our small village. Mostly familiar members were in the area, which is why my mom and dad clearly had no problem with us running over to a bonfire after the sun had already gone down. To get to my uncle's, we had to cross a bridge that was falling apart. It had boards with giant nails plunged through them. The boards weren't quite parallel or consistent in width or length. The bridge handrails and support system were made up of metal cables, tiny wires wrapped around each other, slowly rusting over time. To say the bridge was not appropriate for a child as young as myself would be an understatement. After crossing the slippery bridge in the dark, we could see the bonfire, people laughing, and clearly already mostly intoxicated. My mom trusted my family, but considering how much alcohol ran through our bloodline, I'm not sure why she would at this hour. The night was mostly uneventful, till one of my uncles offered me some whiskey. I was mostly opposed to drinking alcohol and drugs, regardless of who used them. Motherfucker is 11. However, I was more worried about drinking off the same bottle as my uncle. Strangely enough, I am more anti-germs than anti-drugs, and I am really anti-drugs. You motherfucker. "Come on, Daniel. Take a sip," my uncle screamed. He was the oldest of all the kids in my mom's immediate family, and lived across the creek from my Uncle Matt. My other family members around the fire got quiet as I replied to him, "No." However, my uncle did not like the answer and said, "What are you, some kind of wussy? Take some whiskey." I said again, "No, I don't want any." My aunt, just to my right, looked at me and said, "Come on, Daniel, it's just whiskey." I sat there silently, angry that an otherwise good night was turning into an awkward situation where my own blood was trying to infect me with a lifelong addiction. I saw what it did to them, and I didn't want that to be done to me. My uncle hollered, sitting opposite of me around the bonfire, "Here!" as he threw the bottle to me. I didn't even try to catch the bottle, and it smacked against my knee. Immediately I jumped up and yelled, "I said no! Why did you have to ruin my night? And before he could respond, I stormed off towards the bridge to go home. My sister Joanna was in my Uncle Matt's house, so she didn't see what happened. She didn't hear what they screamed after me as I walked away, and I was so upset. I didn't process what they said either. Full of rage, my whole walk home seemed instantaneous despite the walk being about a quarter mile in distance. The timely shower I took daily was spent in the silence of that night. I just stood there, brewing, staring at the knee that had been smacked by the whiskey bottle. This would only further my frustration with people who drank alcohol. I would have understood if I was at least drinking age, but they didn't care, and my mom trusted them. Why? My head slammed against my pillow, right next to the blaring furnace that heated my entire tiny house. The burning gas-filled sound was a welcome relief from the disappointment I felt for my family that night. I knew if I was an adult and saw another adult trying to get a kid to drink alcohol, I'd throw them in the creek head first. But no one did anything. No one defended me. My eyes closed. How could this night get any worse? I thought to myself, not realizing the night was not over yet. My dreams owned my sleep and my soul. They were about to take me to a place I had never been before. Something was very different. I felt a chill to my bones. I woke up in darkness. No longer in my bed. I was in the middle of a mass of nothing. No sign of walls, no sign of a room of any kind. Just silence. I could hear a crackling noise, but it wasn't with my ears. It was like a noise you remember. Only this was playing in the back of my skull. I remember I went to touch the back of my head when I was interrupted by another non-audible noise. It was a voice, but it was speaking a language I had never heard before. I looked up and saw a warped face. It was at this point I knew I was not in my world anymore. I was in a dream. Despite the warped face now being closer to my eyes than before, it remained hard to make out, like my eyes were sleepy, causing an intense blur. Only I could see their body clearly. Their long, skinny legs, their stick-like arms. I can even somehow see their spine protruding outwards and hunched forward, despite me having no clear sight of their back. In dreams, I can hear things most can't hear. I can see things most can't see. I have no explanation, cognitive abilities in a sleeping state. The alien figure spoke what I can only remember as a sharp, aggressive whisper. I was paralyzed, unable to escape, a perfect victim for whatever the creature wanted to do to me. This is what a fly would feel like, trapped in a spider web, only I couldn't even struggle. I was paralyzed physically and mentally. The alien graced the back of my neck with his twig-like fingers. He brushed both hands down the side of my face and shortly after lined one finger up with the front of my throat. I began to feel a piercing sensation, but it was accompanied by the sensation that I was being choked as the alien pushed their finger into my neck. I could see from another perspective within the dream that they had submerged half of their finger under my flesh. As if my soul was outside my body, I could see myself being impaled by this cold gray creature. My eyes turned black as I began to choke up mud and ash like paste out of my mouth. Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. We're happy, so happy. Good morning to you, my mom sang, in the most irritating way to get me up every other morning. I looked over my bed rail, and there she was, with my lunch packed, my backpack in her hand, clearly indicating that I was going to be late for the bus. Time to go to school. This kid is 11 years old. So we have an 11-year-old boy living in a house with his sister, stepfather, and mother. And now the aliens have arrived because 11-year-old Greg is the most popular thing in the universe. Chapter 3. He had black eyes. The walk to the school bus was cold. The gravel covering the road up the hill to our stop creaked and crunched under my feet. I didn't understand why it was already so cold, but I just came from Ohio, a place I only knew for its 90 to 100-degree summers and blazing humidity. Maybe I just lost touch with the place I was born at 11 years old. The cold breeze, the gray skies, the place I knew to be everything became a memory after being in Ohio for only a few months, yet it still felt like home. My cousin Michelle was at the top of the hill, waiting for the bus as well. Joanna remained silent as we walked up. "Hi, Michelle," I said as our quarter-mile walk ended. "Hi, Greg and Joanna," Michelle replied. Michelle had her bangs cut in a straight line. She had dirty blonde hair and freckles. She was always kind of a geeky-looking kid, but because we were only a year apart in age, we hung out a lot at 11. "How long have you been waiting?" Joanna asked Michelle. "About 9 years, it feels like," Michelle replied. The bus came around the corner, moments later. I looked at Michelle and said, "Guess we got lucky with our timing." She replied immediately, "Shut up." Suddenly, the bus exploded into thousands of pieces. Michelle was littered from head to toe with shrapnel and went flying over the side of the hill. Joanna was screaming in horror from her own wounds as Michelle jolted around, spitting up blood and screaming, "Vacation! Vacation now!" I know. I should apologize. That didn't really happen. However, I imagine stuff like that all the time. The bus pulled up and took us to school. Just like I remembered, the smell was the same. The stops were pretty much the same, and the school itself looked the same. Ocean View Elementary. I'm not sure why it was called that, considering there was no ocean nearby. So I don't see how there could be a distant view of such a massive but distant mass of water. Some of the teachers here waiting for us as we climbed off the bus. Maybe they just wanted to see what we all looked like, despite having no idea which of us were going to be appointed to each class. The first day of school so far was what I expected. Orientation. We met with a curly brown-haired woman. She was to be my teacher for every subject the entire year. I had the unfortunate realization that I was to be in the same class as Heather Simpson, a girl who had hit on me the entire year prior. She would follow me around the halls, out on the playground, everywhere there wasn't a boys-only sign. Heather was built like an Amazonian child would be, only bulkier. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and despite how that sounds, was a pain to look at. Maybe it was her crooked teeth, or maybe it was her bad breath, but one could easily smell her from many feet away. After plenty of time killing, our teacher finally released us for lunch, then recess. My favorite activity was to take part in the playground, in the swings. I liked to swing as high as I could, then jump off. There was a ton of sawdust, so I didn't really worry about falling on the ground. Today, I wanted to get further than any of the other kids, so I swung back and forth as hard as I could, but landed short of the boy next to me, so I tried again. But again, I landed short. Climbing back on, I thought about what happened last night, how angry I was at my uncle, how none of the family was there for me, and I felt like I lost a sense of any limitations in my body. I swung forward, then back, repeated in a way I barely remember, and quickly after I was on the ground, touching the very edge of the border of the swing set area. In other words, I had swung so far, I nearly bashed my head on the pavement just outside the safe sawdust-covered rectangle floor. It's getting tense. Excuse me. Oh my God, Daniel! That was insane! You were like a bird! A voice came from the side of the playground. It was my friend David. This was the first time I had seen him since last year, and I was immediately filled with joy. David! I screamed and ran over to him immediately, going for a high five. David returned my excitement and lifted his hand for a mutual high five. I felt a wet splat on my skin and realized I missed a key moment before we slapped hands. He had licked his hand as I lifted mine, because David is and always will be disgusting. He's my friend, but he's disgusting. Gross, David! I yelled, and David replied not with words but with a laugh, followed by a snort. David was wearing a yellow and maroon horizontal striped shirt, and as usual, he was about 2 inches taller than me. He had darker skin than me, and had his dark hair cut like he didn't have a care in the world. I saw your sister today, Daniel. She's hot. David belched. I replied, Can you never say anything like that to me never again, please? David again snorted, laughing. It was like the guy lived to trigger me. At 11. We tried to catch up. The bell rang for us to come back in. David went for another high five, but I just ran away screaming, No, David, don't! As I walked into the classroom, the teacher announced that she had already gone through all the material for the day. She concluded that we should move on to the start of one subject of our schooling early, so we had more time for a butterfly project in the coming days. The subject we were to cover today was science, more specifically, dinosaurs. This is a day I would remember for probably the rest of my life. As I was about to see something I had already seen, something I never wanted to see, but had been forced to experience the sight of it repeatedly. My teacher pushed in the VHS, and at first everything seemed normal. It was a generic film of other reptiles that lived on Earth long before humans. No big deal. However, the narrator began talking about an idea that had no real scientific value that I could think of. He asked, What if a human was combined with a dinosaur? Hearing this, I immediately scoffed. My condescending reaction was muffled quickly by the image they showed after. It was the alien. They called it a dinosaur-human DNA splice, but it was almost identical to what I dreamt of before. The face that haunted my imagination was realized in the physical world. This was the first time I had seen anything like it with my own eyes. Immediately, I stood up and left the classroom. The teacher didn't remember my name, so she yelled after me, Sweetheart? Oh, excuse me. Student? I ignored her and walked towards the principal's office. I was lost in horror and thoughts of how the rest of the class reacted. It was like none of them had seen him before. The alien. Why was I the only one who seemed upset? Why would they show that to such young kids? Why did they show that to me? As I walked into the principal's office, the plump short secretary wearing a tacky flowered dress immediately asked me why I was there. Rarely do kids wind up in the principal's office area on the first day. I replied, I need to call my mom. And I did. To my disappointment, but not surprise, my mom was away at one of her many jobs. I asked the secretary with tears beginning to fall down my cheeks, Can I stay here till it's time to go home? The secretary saw I was struggling and incredibly uncomfortable. She called the principal out of her office. What's your name? said the principal, as she slowed in her approach towards me. "I'm Daniel. I just want to wait here till the bus comes and then I want to go home." The principal tried to get me to explain what was wrong, but I didn't want to talk about it. They called me over to class and had a student bring me my belongings from the room I abandoned. There, I waited till the buses were ready to take me home. I didn't talk to my sister or my cousin the entire walk down the hill. When I got through my bedroom door, I closed it and planted my face in my cheap foam pillow. I was going to wait till my mom got home to say anything. My mom was my safety, the only person I thought could protect me. I relied on her for everything, and knew if I had anyone I could talk to about it, it was her. That night for dinner, we were having lentils and toast. My mom had put food on the crock pot to cook all day while she was at work. This was common for us as we didn't have very much money. And food like this was inexpensive. "How was school today, kids?" my mom asked all three of us. Christina, my eldest sister, remained silent while Joanna began her usual rant about anything and everything involving her outfits, her hair, her friend's appearance by comparison to her own, or anything else involving her reflection. After Joanna was done talking about the most superficial of topics, my mom turned to me and asked how I was. I replied, "The teacher showed me a picture of an alien on a video and I cried." My mom's face went from curious to angry in seconds. She replied, "They showed you an alien? A scary one? At your age?" I replied, "It had dark black eyes and scales. It had no nose, but it had tiny air holes where its nose would be, and they said it was a dinosaur human, but it looked like an alien." My sister Joanna laughed and said, "Wow, sounds awesome." I frowned and looked at my food hopelessly. My sister regularly seemed like a sociopath to me. I never understand why she thought my sadness was a laughing matter. My mom spoke again. "Well, I'll have a talk with your teacher." Not having the emotional strength to nod, I just sat silently looking at my food till it was clear that everyone was done with dinner. After I put my head on my pillow for a final time that day, my fears became realized. The creature I dreamt of before had more strength than ever. He was here now, waiting in the black. Oh my God. Chapter 4. Hole in the Wall. It had been 4 months since I saw the distorted alien's face streaming out to me through the VHS in my class. We had already completed the butterfly project, and were consuming our time with basic math, spelling, and for some reason, playing the Oregon Trail on our Macintosh computers. David and I had been hanging out almost every recess since the beginning of school. Out on the playground, David asked me one day, "Hey, can I take the bus home with you?" I replied, "Yeah," with a little shake in my voice, as I was not sure if my mom would approve. As we arrived home, my mom was not there. She was at work, as usual. David would giggle at everything my sister said walking down the long gravel road to my house. It was obvious he was pretty much into every other girl he met. Michelle would just look at her shoes and kick rocks. She didn't really have much to say to us normally. She was always somewhat of an introvert. Once we got home, David looked at my bed above the washer and dryer and laughed. "Oh my God, that's awesome. I am forced to share my bunk bed with my brother. You just get to share yours with the whole family's dirty clothes. Ha 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 ha." I looked at him sarcastically, Not sure if he was seriously complimenting my situation or not. Just then, we heard a car pull up outside. Shortly after, we heard a girl laughing and hollering, "Bye, Mom!" David and I looked at each other. David had a huge grin on his face. It was as if "Girls, I love girls, give me girls" was written ear to ear on the kid at 12. Joanna went to open the door and said, "Hi, Mara." David and I started waiting for this Mara to show her face as the doorframe was blocking our view of her. David giggled again as she walked through the door. It was just some random girl with the biggest breasts I had ever seen. Joanna went to open the door and said, "Hi, Mara." David and I started waiting for this Mara to show her face as the doorframe was blocking our view of her. David giggled again as she walked through the door. It was just some random girl with the biggest breasts I had ever seen. I didn't find her attractive, but David could be heard loudly gulping, so I could only imagine this was his type of thing. This Mara girl was wearing a neon shirt, blue jeans, had curly brown hair and freckles. She probably isn't what you are imagining, as she came off as more of a band geek than anything else. David stared in awe at the girl's breasts till I punched him in the shoulder. He giggled and said, "What? Sorry." And I pulled him back in my tiny room to play video games with me. When my mom got home, she was surprised to see Joanna and I both had friends over. Joanna shared her bedroom with Christina, and I shared my bedroom with a washer and dryer. So there was no room for anyone to really sleep in a community fashion in either of our rooms. Despite this reality, over dinner, we still suggested that my mom let both spend the night. My mom agreed, and we most all wound up on the front room floor in sleeping bags together. Mara was the only one who slept on the couch. This is going bad. David could not stop obsessing over Mara and her gigantic breasts. But fortunately, he was also a moron. After everyone turned out the lights, David began loudly building a plot to somehow get Mara and his lips to connect. David said, "Hey, dare me to kiss Mara?" to me, and I replied, "David, no." He said again, even more loudly, "I'm going to go over there and kiss Mara on the lips." I replied, "David, you need to stop being a pervert." Yet he did not listen. Giggling, he said, "I want to kiss her on the lips. I'm going to do it." Then Mara loudly said, "Excuse me?" I immediately replied, "David, you idiot." The room remained silent for the rest of the night. The next morning, we all ate cereal and went right back to school. David wore the same clothes as the day before, but he was used to it. Mara had brought clothes from home, hence why her mom had dropped her off. At recess that day, Philip, the school bully, was waiting for me on the playground. He had given me grief throughout the year, but none so great that it was a huge problem. He had curly blonde hair, completely random teeth, as if God himself had thrown his teeth into his mouth like dice, shrugged, and then walked away, leaving them right where they fell. And as far as Philip's height, he was about an inch shorter than me. "Hey, ugly!" Philip screamed in my direction. I ignored him. "You know I'm gonna beat you down one day," he asked, obviously struggling with however his dad or mom treated him at home. I continued to ignore him. I had no interest in making my childhood more screwed up than it needed to be. Off in the distance, just past Philip, I saw a girl. One I had encountered a few times before, but she stood out today more than normal. My mom always taught me to be strong, to say what I feel, and to stick up for myself. This came into play with approaching people I was interested in as well. Walking past Philip, as if he didn't exist, I approached the girl and said, "Hi, I'm Daniel." The girl turned to me and replied, "I'm Aubrey." She was very short, had perfectly straight hair, and bangs, somewhat like, go figure, Beatles again. The dark brown-haired, pale-faced Aubrey was spending time on the playground with her friend Amber. Amber was blonde-haired and super skinny. I thought both looked so friendly and nice that if I wanted to hang out with them more, but the bell had rung and it was time to go in. On my way in, I hadn't noticed that Philip was red-faced and enraged. I had ignored him this entire time. But he was a bully. I had no concern with being a social hero for a bully. Philip had the same class as me now, as he has repeat problems with students in his former class. Philip was clearly upset that day, more than usual. As the day progressed, he kept interrupting the teacher, and when the teacher finally confronted him about his rudeness, he told her to go F herself, only he didn't just say F. He continued to scream at the teacher, throwing a childish tantrum until the teacher decided to call the main office for help. It was incredibly awkward seeing the principal herself with an assistant come to the class and drag Philip out of the room, kicking and screaming. The rest of the class just felt tense and numb after he had left. I could see a small boy in the corner of the room. He was clearly shaking the entire time Philip was screaming and cussing at the teacher. I wondered why. I wondered what was going on in that dirty blonde his head. After I got home, the entire night felt different than usual. Seeing someone's life come apart like that kind of reminded me how good my own life was. I wasn't happy to see Philip dragged out of class, nor the dirty blonde kid shaking in horror as Philip yelped. But during that whole time, I felt confident. My emotions were hearty. I wasn't afraid of Philip. I just felt sorry for him. Sitting alone in my room, I was lost in thought. My imagination consumed my senses. I could see Philip crying, alone in a room, screaming as his father. On the other side of a door Philip was locked behind. My imagination seemed more like a ghost, haunting Philip's house. From the top corner of the room I saw it all. His mother high on drugs, sitting in the front room with only static on the television. The dad flexing his fist, yelling back at Philip through the door. And Philip kicking the door, punching the wall, doing whatever he could to make the room he was locked in look how he felt on the inside. This was just imagination, though. I hope his life is much better than these fleeting thoughts. Off to my dreams again. Holy fuck. That was chapter 2, 3, and 4 of Reaper's Creek. The last of the Unholy Trinity. Another sister has shown up, and we are being led through this magical world by an overly introspective 11-year-old who can somehow look back on his own childhood. But those are things we can talk about another time. Because this has been Doctorpiece Theatre, and my name is Dr. Dennis Business. And as always, my friends,